So first and foremost, I want to give credit to some people who put this together, and I had a chance to just look it over, and I actually learned some things, or actually remembered some things that I had forgotten about presentations. So I hope that this is very helpful for you. So members of the senior seminar, past and present, have worked on these presentations. So I want to give them credit. And also remind you to give credit to, again, somebody asked about citations, but usually you don't cite unless it's a figure, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But again, give credit if somebody added something to your work. So let's get started. First, I'll talk about an outline. And so just like with a paper that you're writing, you want to write an outline sort of to guide you through, right, your paper. Same thing with the presentation, and maybe you all already do this. I know I do it with every single presentation. I start an outline, and just so I want to see the presentation flow, where I'm going, and what am I going to talk about. So it's very useful to create.
Sedalia. Yeah, there's a problem with your sound. We don't hear you right now.
I'm going to take these off. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I think this has a little something. Okay, sorry about that. So did you hear anything?
We heard about the outline, like important.
Right, an outline, okay. So an outline is important because, when you write a paper, you want an outline, right, to help you put all your ideas down. Well, the same thing goes when you are going to present something. You want to have an outline. And so these are some of the things that we suggest that you include in your outline, including the first slide would have, as you saw the previous one, the title of your presentation, authors, obviously your name, and your advisor, and so on, and any acknowledgements you would like to, any person you want to acknowledge, or people you want to acknowledge. Then you want to have an introduction, again, very similar to when you're writing a paper. This is an overview or a reason for your research, right? Followed by a thesis statement. What are your project goals, right? And I think Elizabeth just went over this a little bit, so I'll just do this very briefly. Then you want to talk about your methods and approach. What did you do for your research? And if you have any, and for those of you that are starting out for your proposal, hopefully you have some preliminary results. So you want to discuss those briefly. And then finally, what are the broader implications of your research? So summarize your research and what are the next steps to take? There's probably still there's always going to be a question. There's always going to be new steps to follow up on. So don't use this outline exactly in your presentation. And some people don't actually use an outline in their presentation. Some like to use an outline in a presentation. So that's up to you. If it helps you and you think it helps your audience by outlining what you're going to be talking about, that's great. But I typically don't use an outline, but I've seen some great presentations that do use outlines. So that's really up to you. And as Elizabeth said, try to stick to a one slide per minute. You don't want to stay on one slide for too long because you kind of lose your audience. You want to kind of, have a certain flow as you're moving along. So that's what we would suggest, just one slide per minute, right? And if you have any questions, you could stop me as I'm going along. All right, some general guidelines. Know your audience. So for this group, your audience is going to be kind of varied, right? There's even in my small group, I have social science, projects where somebody's looking at allergies, somebody else is looking at some environmental justice issues, one with water contamination. There's somebody looking at carbon sequestration, someone else looking at volcanic eruptions and so on. And so you want to give your talk sort of to a general science audience. So you're going to have to make it a little bit more simple. If you were giving this talk to your peers who are doing the same discipline, studying the same discipline as you would give a different talk because they would understand a little bit more. However, For our purposes, you want to make it a little bit more general so that everyone understands what you're talking about. Okay, so you're going to tailor your presentation to the situation. So keep that in mind. And that goes along with the next point, avoid jargon. There's a lot of acronyms and people throw them around all the time. And even in certain talks, I don't know what the person is talking about. So be very careful not to do that, especially if you're used to doing that with your colleagues or your friends or so on. So avoid jargon. Basic rule, repetition is good. Okay, so you want the person or your audience to really know what your work is about. So you want to say at the beginning what you're going to say. And then as you're talking, throughout your talk, you want to say it, obviously. And then at the end, you want to summarize what you said. So summarize the main points in the conclusion. So again, you want everybody to walk out knowing what your presentation was about, right? Okay. Now let's go to methods and approach. So you want to use photos or diagrams to describe a setup. The clearer, the better. And this, we talked a little bit, or was talked a little bit about last week when we talked about the results and figures. And so photos, diagrams are wonderful to really show the audience what you're talking about, all right? Always remember to indicate the data source if it's not yours. If you took it from somewhere else, you want to cite that. If you adapted it from another figure, you want to say that, adapted or modified from so-and-so. So always remember to do that. But don't get too much into the details of your methods because again, especially in this scenario, most people are not working on the same thing and you're gonna lose your audience if you start getting into too many details. So clear photographs or clear diagrams to describe your methods and approach are the best. So let me show you some examples of that. So I believe you saw this last week, and this is a great image here. So here, this was taken from Zhang et al. In 2014. So you have to give credit to where you got this image. And it's very clear, even for someone that's never done this type of work, you could really kind of see what's happening, right? You might want to explain some things like what this is, gas chromatography, mass spectrometer. You could just kind of briefly explain what's going on. Again, you don't have to go into too many details, but just give a broad overview of how this works, all right? You might also just want to show the instrumentation and talk about your method, what you used, how you used it. But again, very briefly, you don't want to go into too many details because you'll lose your audience. All right, you might use a model approach. And again, we talked a little bit about this last week. You might want to create some kind of summary cartoon, a flow chart, or a concept map. So we've been talking about those. And this really helps the audience understand what's going on. I have some of my students already did some of these, which were excellent. So it was really easy for me to just look at them and know what they were talking about. So these are very useful. Also consider showing this at the beginning and at the end of your presentation so that it really gets cemented in the audience's mind. And you can use web sources for figures, but always include references if you're going to be doing that. All right. If I'm going too fast, let me know. Now, when you're presenting the data and the results, we talked about this last week also, but just a little review. Avoid using tables unless it's just a small amount of data, okay? Use figures instead of tables. You want to be able to show this and have it clearly shown. Tables just, there's just a bunch of numbers. It doesn't really show what you're talking about. And so let's look at this, and I'm not sure if we saw this last week, but here's an example of somebody who just wrote, had a table of all these numbers, and it really doesn't show you what's happening, right? I mean, you could put this in your paper and then, if you really want to know what's going on, somebody could actually take the numbers and do something with it. But if you're doing this in a presentation, it really isn't doing much. You're going to be explaining it. Even if you explain it, it's still, especially for us visual learners, doesn't do much, right? But if you take a look at this is the same thing, but this is showing you a figure. It's a really beautiful figure in my opinion. So you have your title, you have all your axes clearly labeled, you have different colors for precipitation and discharge. And then you say a little bit about it, and then you're explaining this. So everybody knows what's going on, right? And again, as you're doing this, make sure you tell everybody what all the axes mean, you know, what everything means, even though this is really clear figure, but it's like two things that are helping you present your work. All right, so try to stay away from tables, use figures instead. All right. So using figures instead of words, again, figures should be readable, understandable, uncluttered. Like that example, I thought was a really good example. It's not cluttered. You know, you could see everything very clearly. If you're going to take something from, and I think Jackie mentioned this before, from another paper, or, you know, you're going to copy it or whatever, make sure that it's clear. Make sure it's not, I've seen presentations where the figure is really not very clear. It's not hard, it's hard to understand, and you don't want to do that. Okay, you want to be very careful not to do that. Always include references for data and images on the figure. Always include units, don't forget your units. And if you, just as the previous figure, they used really, the colors were really good, so it made things stand out. So you might want to do something like this. You might want to use blue for representing something that's cold, red for warm, dark for something smaller, little, bright for something that's a lot. And be very careful with the colors that you're using, so that they do stand out and they're not kind of hidden, or they get, you know, if you have too many different colors, or they kind of get lost, become invisible. So be very careful with the colors that you use in your figures. Hold on, there's something in the chat.
Oh, I just wanted to remind people not to use red and green together as well.
Right, too cold, too warm. Okay.
It's also for people with color blindness. They just can't distinguish.
Thank you. Okay. So let's take a look at this. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this slide?
There's a lot of information and it's not really clear like what's the most important.
Exactly. Let me see. I'm looking at the chat.
Also,
Yes.
like the citing is not clear. It's just like a link. It's not really in scientific form, in a format.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Right, no title. Okay, good. Images are cluttered, too many figures, too much jargon. Very good. Yes, you don't want to do this to your audience. You definitely don't want to do this to your audience. There's just too many figures here. There's too many words. Yes, you don't want to have that many words. You could have bullet points, but writing things out like this is just really too much for this slide. You might want to break it down into different slides if it's really important, but to put it all on one slide is just too much. I would just lose it. I wouldn't pay attention to the slide at all. So just be careful not to do this. All right. Oops, let me go back here. And I think I mentioned this before, walk people through your figures, explain the axes, of course. And remember that your audience is seeing these figures for the first time. So don't go over them too fast, you know, take your time, explain them. And again, remember that they haven't seen these. So to use, sometimes you'll think this is just very easy to understand, but not to everyone, especially if they've never seen your figures. As I said earlier, add bullet points or brief descriptions instead of just writing everything out, right? Because again, you're going to lose your audience if you do that. All right, so now preparing your presentation. Okay, so I guess that was a point. No random effects, or I guess some logical animations are okay. Just don't don't lose your work or your research by putting all these cute little things. So just be careful with that. Some people can do it, some people cannot. It's just one of those touchy things. So just be careful not to add too many random effects to your presentation. We usually use PowerPoint or PDF. These are the standards. So avoid using others. So just use a simple PowerPoint template, and don't use something that's too busy, for example, when you're doing these presentations. Use 3 to 7 bullets per page. Again, you don't want to add too much information. You don't want to lose your audience. Avoid writing out, and especially reading and long and complete sentences on slides like I just did. So you don't want to just, I mean, I keep wanting to say stand there. You know, this is Zoom, so it's going to be a little different, but still you want to avoid just having all this writing and just reading it, you know, reading it as you're moving through it. Let's see, consistent slide appearance. So try to be consistent with your fonts, colors, and animations throughout your presentation. And spell check, very important as you're moving along, to just remember to spell check and do it several times, just in case. And finally, don't put important things at the bottom of your slide. If something is very important to your research, try to talk about it and put it at the top of the slide, right? Okay, what font to use? So you should use a font that's 18 points or larger, right? So that it can be seen. I mean, again, we're talking about a typical presentation, something that you're doing live, but still try to, you know, try to use this information because you're going to be going and giving other presentations, and it won't always be Zoom. So I didn't get rid of some of these slides because I wanted you to remember this for future presentations, and hopefully next semester you'll be giving presentations live and not on Zoom. So remember that you want everyone to be able to see your writing. So 18 points or larger. Avoid using capital letters because it's harder to read. All right. But if you do have any references or any citations, you can use something smaller, like 12 to 14 point font, right? And I guess these are some of the fonts that look good on PowerPoint, for example. Okay. What color to use? Remember that dark letters against a light background work best for small rooms, especially when the lights are on, like so. So you can clearly see, right, what works and what doesn't, and practice, you know, looking at this. All right, now, so giving your talk, practice. That's very important, to practice your talk before you give it. When you're practicing, you actually do discover that you don't understand some things, and maybe you need to look up a few things that you thought you understood. I'm sure you've been in a situation where you think you understand something and then someone questions you about it, and then you realize you really didn't understand it as well as you thought you did. So when you practice, these are the things that you start to understand. Oh, I don't understand this as well. Let me look this up a little bit more. So remember that. Develop a natural flow and come up with better phrasing and describe things. No uptalk. I mean, I think a lot of us try not to do that, and once in a while it still sneaks in. So practice your presentation. And I would say always know your slides. Don't memorize, but at the point at the bottom, don't memorize your talk, but I would know what slide comes next. That's one of the things that always helps me. I know which slide is coming next. I don't need to memorize my talk, but as long as I know what the next slide is, it really helps with the flow of the presentation. Also, when you memorize your talk, it sounds very robotic and not as authentic as you probably would want it to sound. So just kind of know your slides, know your material. Don't write anything on your slides that you're not sure about, all right? Stay within the time limit. So you are gonna have 10 minutes to give your presentation. So please stay within the time limit because there's a lot of other students that have to do the same thing. And so you don't wanna take up anyone else's time. Another tip is try speaking out loud or too loud to get the feeling where your upper limit is. So all of these things will help you when you're giving your presentation. What to wear. So I think nowadays things are a little bit less formal, but some of us still like to get a little dressed up when we give a presentation to show how important it is to us. So dress up. Maybe wear a jacket. I don't know if we want to go that far, but maybe a nice shirt. More formal attire makes you appear more authoritative, and you show you care enough to try to look nice. Darker clothes are more powerful than light clothes, and shirts or blouses with collar are better than collarless ones. Clothes with press creases are a sign of power. So I'm assuming this all came from this Ask Dr. Marty here. It depends on the custom in the field. Earth scientists are viewed with suspicion if they wear a tie. Although I've seen a few. So my advice is feel comfortable. You don't want to wear something that makes you feel completely uncomfortable. So be comfortable, but dress it up a little, right? Dress it up a little so it shows this is your presentation, you're proud of your presentation, and it's not a normal day, right? Sorry, there was something in the chat. It's true. So Jeremy says that he feels colors are important in the Zoom world. Yes, I agree. I definitely agree. You know, and in Zoom world, you could just dress up the top, right? As long as you don't accidentally get up to go do something and people could see your shorts or something. But in Zoom world, it's really just put a nice top on and yeah, it's a lot easier, right? Okay. Oops, where was it? There we go. Starting and finishing. Okay, so just like with writing a paper, well, starting I think is the hardest. At least it is for me. Starting the presentation is the hardest part. So maybe you do, in this case, want to memorize something or memorize a few lines just to get you started and feel more comfortable. You know, hello, my name is so-and-so. The title of my talk is blah, blah, blah. So if that makes you feel more comfortable, you know, go ahead and do that. But, you know, maybe again, memorize a few ways of doing it and then practice it. As long as you don't memorize the whole presentation, this should be fine just to get you started, all right? Because again, that is the hardest part of the presentation. Think carefully about your final words and how to finish your presentation strongly. So don't just drift off, you know, I guess that's all I have to say. Okay, that's it, you know, whatever. Try to finish strongly. So again, practice what you want to say. So you might want to memorize the ending also
And we're
a
all
little
talking.
bit.
I'm like, I'm gonna shower and like do my laundry. Be right back. And I just left you there with Mia.
There we go.
Sorry. We're
So-
having a roommate crisis, but it's okay.
Oh, I'm wondering about that, Alejandro. Don't worry.
No, it's fine. We're just discussing. Literally just my friend's room. Sorry.
No problem.
It's Zoom world. I thought it was actually my son for a second. Okay. All right. So ending your talk, say thank you, pause for an applause, and then say any questions. All right. Eye contact. So this is really, I don't think it really pertains to what we're going to be doing in Zoom, but in the future, again, I wanted to leave this here so we get remember for hopefully next semester. Eye contact is very important, but I think with Zoom, I don't know. I think I've gotten more used to it than I was initially, where I was kind of looking up at the camera, looking down. I think I'm a little bit more comfortable. So hopefully you're all a little bit more comfortable, but you're not really looking at an audience. I'm looking at the PowerPoint right now and I could see people on the side, but I can only see a few people. So this is really different, but these are just some pointers to what, for when you are speaking in front of people. So for experienced speakers, speak freely and look directly at the audience. Remember to roam around the room and don't lock onto one person. That'll make them very uncomfortable. For more inexperienced speakers, put your outline and key points on your presentation on your slide. That'll help you. or guide you, right? And it'll make you feel more comfortable. You don't have to remember what to say. Eyes are on the slide, not you, if you do this. And key points are there in case you forget to say something, and also for people who weren't listening and who are visual learners. So keep these things in mind. And again, this is when you're presenting in person. Stand where the slides can be seen. So many times people get nervous and maybe they stand in front of their slides, and make sure you stand to the side and you know, so they could see the slides clearly. Track your talk using the monitor, so you could track the timing, and again, if you know your slides, you kind of have an idea, and you timed yourself beforehand, you practice, you have an idea how, you know, where you're at in your presentation. But sometimes when you're presenting, you might talk a little bit faster, or, you know, something might come up, somebody might ask a question. So these are things that'll come up. But if you, again, if you know your slides, you can, you know, kind of have an idea where you're at in your presentation. Let's see, and pace yourself. Okay, that's very important. Pace yourself, but also know, especially for us, is that you only have 10 minutes for your presentation, right? Okay, some don'ts. Don't apologize or make comments about yourself. I hope you're not bored. I was working on this till 3 a.m., so excuse it, you know, so don't put yourself down, especially, even though some of us will make a joke of things, but try not to do that. Try not to apologize or make comments about yourself while you're doing this. Don't overuse the pointer if you're using that. A lot of people will do this and makes us dizzy, whoever's watching, right? Be careful with that, or point it to the audience. Don't try to be cute, and don't force being funny. Stay formal. I would add that you do want to stay authentic to yourself. So there are some people who are really funny and who get away with it. And if you know you are, then, you know, but still stay within the formal range, but be authentic, because we do want to enjoy your presentation the way you are. Don't forget acknowledgements. Always give people proper credit. And don't try to build suspense and unveil a surprising ending, you know, with your research. Kind of stay formal again with everything. Concluding, have only a few concluding statements, and then come back to the big picture and summarize the significance of your work, right? So this is how you want to end your presentation. You want to open up your perspectives, describe future work, raise some questions or potential implications of your work. And once you're done with your concluding statements, leave your last slide up during questions, and don't end a slide with references. That was some suggestions from before. So leave your last slide from your presentation up, and then just wait for questions, right? Say thank you, and then wait for questions. Preparing for the unknown. What can go wrong? Try not to, focus on this too much, but just be prepared. There could be uncertainty about the material, interruptions, running out of slides, or running out of time. So let's look at these really briefly. So uncertainty about the material. It's you're not gonna always know everything. And actually you learn a lot when people raise questions, because sometimes it's like, wow, I really hadn't thought about that. I'm gonna look into it, but don't feel bad if you don't have an answer necessarily. Just say, or if the discussion is gonna be long, just so we could talk about this later, but you're not always gonna know everything. And so it's okay to say, I haven't looked into this, or don't try to make up an answer if you don't know it. In other words, the audience most of the time knows it if you're trying to do that. Let's see if I missed anything. So pretty much, I think I said everything. All right. Again, please stop me if you have any questions. If you finish too fast, short talks are better than longer ones. It opens up time for questions, so don't worry about that. But you can, as you're moving along and maybe you notice, oh, I'm almost, I'm getting close to my last slide, and I still have a lot of time, you could slow down a little bit, maybe give some examples. But if you do finish early, it's okay. Again, there'll be more time for questions. Just don't worry, don't get nervous. Just kind of take it step by step. Okay, conclude unhurriedly, summarize your main points, but don't be repetitious. Okay, just to add time. If you run out of time, okay, you have to be really careful about this. Avoid this if you can. It's impolite to the other speakers and the audience if it happens. So don't assume that you can carry on past your time. Don't skip all of your slides looking for the right one to put next. Conclude on time whenever you're in your talk by making your main points. And in PowerPoint, you can't just type the number of your concluding slide and press enter to skip right to it. So don't just keep moving around and confusing the audience, but definitely try to stay on time. So that's why you want to practice your presentation so that you do stay within those 10 minutes. Okay. So questions after your talk, again, they help you in writing up your research, identify parts the audience did not understand. So how can you say this better so that you can get this across? Focuses and adds dimension to your analysis. So the questions are very important, both for the audience and for yourself. You can repeat the question or ask for clarification if you're not quite sure. And this gives you time to think, so remember that. The rest of the audience may not have heard the question, so this is also good for them. And if you heard the question incorrectly, it presents an opportunity for clarification. All right, preparing for answers. So again, you're not always going to know everything. But do remember that it is your topic, it's what you research, and so you probably will know more than most of the people in the audience. Keep your answers, when you get an answer, keep your answers short and to the point. Don't respond with another lecture. Just answer the question clearly and, in a short period of time. Anticipate typical questions and prepare for them. So this is very important. So you know your topic, anticipate what, might be some of the questions people might ask. Okay, so generalizability of your findings to other times, other places, other conditions, methodological biases, uncertainties, exceptions, or priorities. Again, if you don't know the answer, don't feel like you have to answer something. Don't answer if you don't know it. I mean, say, I have to look into this more or something, or that's a good point. Let's discuss this afterwards, and so on. Okay, don't make up something if you don't know what it is. Okay, so the Senior Thesis Seminar is a good platform to practice your presentation skills and feel more confident as you move forward. And you do have the Barnard Speaking Fellows available to you so that you can get some help in speaking. So I would use them if, I think they're just incredibly useful. So I would definitely contact them and maybe they could help you practice or help you put together your presentation. And finally, so in summary, presenting your research is critically important in advancing both your ideas and your reputation. Structure your content in a way that is comfortable for you and understandable by your audience. And as I said earlier, be authentic. So don't memorize and know your slides, and then just be yourself. Again, stay on the formal side of it, but also be yourself, and don't try to be something you're not as you're presenting. And think ahead about where you might encounter difficulties and figure out ways to overcome them as much as possible. And of course, there's always going to be things that come up that, you can't anticipate, but just do your best. And again, the more you practice, the better you'll be at giving presentations. And that is it for me.